The privilege is over, my wife, the CEO, declared, deciding that from now on, we would have separate budgets. I agreed, already knowing she'd soon regret it. On Sunday, as usual, my wife's family came for lunch. But when my mother-in-law walked into the kitchen, she screamed so loudly that even the neighbors ran out of their houses. It started the same way all corporate takeovers do, with a glass of overpriced wine and a speech no one asked for. Friday evening, post-dinner glow. Candles flickering like they were nervous about what was coming. My wife, Clara Reynolds, the visionary CEO of her luxury wellness empire, Serenité by Clara, sat across from me with the posture of someone about to fire a department. Her tone was calm, clinical, the kind of calm you only hear from surgeons or sociopaths. The privilege is over, Lucas, she said. From now on, we'll have separate budgets. She said it like she was unveiling a new product line, clean, confident, completely detached from humanity. I blinked at her, half expecting a PowerPoint slide to appear behind her explaining Phase 1 fiscal independence, separate budgets. That's how my marriage got demoted to an accounting experiment. The thing is, Clara loved to talk about empowerment, especially hers. Ever since Forbes Women in Leadership did a puff piece on her, she'd been walking like she owned oxygen. The article headline was "The Woman Who Balances Work, Wellness, and Marriage." Hilarious. I didn't know I was part of her brand strategy. That night, she had just finished hosting her parents, Margaret and Henry Turner, the royalty of passive aggression. They'd come over for dinner, which in Clara's family meant, let's criticize everything and call it sophistication. I'd made roast chicken, golden brown, crispy skin, seasoned to perfection, and Margaret, wearing a string of pearls that looked like they'd seen colonization firsthand, said, a bit dry. I smiled politely and mentally calculated how many hours of therapy it would take to undo that sentence. Then Henry, retired finance consultant turned full-time nuisance, swirled his wine like he was auditioning for Master Sommelier and said, "This bottle's a little too pedestrian." Pedestrian. The man once drank boxed wine on a fishing trip, but now he was suddenly Napa's gatekeeper. Clara, of course, laughed with them. The same fake laugh she uses at galas when someone mispronounces quinoa. The whole dinner felt like an endurance test for my sanity. I cleared plates, poured refills, played the silent husband role, the same one society expects you to master while your wife turns dinner into a TED Talk about female leadership in the age of equity. After her parents left, I thought we'd unwind. Maybe a movie, maybe that rare human thing called conversation. Instead, she set her wine glass down like it was a gavel and delivered her little financial emancipation speech. "Lucas," she said, crossing her legs with that CEO flair, "I think it's time we both practice more fiscal responsibility." I raised an eyebrow. Fiscal responsibility? You spent $2,000 last week on candles that smell like despair and eucalyptus. They're aromatherapy tools, she replied sharply. And this isn't about spending. It's about independence. Ah, independence, I nodded, sipping my beer. The humble man's aromatherapy. So, separate accounts? Like roommates with shared trauma? Her eyes narrowed. Don't be dramatic. This will be healthy for us. Healthy, that's how she described kale smoothies, fasting retreats, and now our financial divorce. I didn't argue. Not because I agreed, but because I'd learned long ago that debating Clara Reynolds was like debating Siri. She'd talk in loops until you surrendered. I smiled, leaned back, and said, "Sure, let's try it." That smile freaked her out. I could see it. She expected pushback, not compliance. Clara thrived on resistance. It gave her a sense of control. My calmness, that was chaos to her. See, what Clara didn't realize was that I'd been preparing for this moment, unintentionally, but still. I'd watched her morph from the woman who used to dance barefoot in the kitchen to the executive who treated home life like a quarterly report. Every dinner was an agenda. Every weekend, a strategy session. She had meetings scheduled with herself, literally blocked off in her phone calendar. Review life goals, 10 a.m. Saturday. Meanwhile, I was the guy cooking, fixing the Wi-Fi, unclogging the sink, and pretending not to notice that she'd started referring to our marriage as a partnership with evolving expectations. Yeah, I read between those lines. So when she dropped that separate budgets bomb, I didn't take it personally. I took it professionally. Because if she wanted a corporate setup, she'd get one, with interest. After she left for her nightly skincare routine, which takes longer than most building permits, I sat alone at the table, swirling my beer like Henry, thinking about how ridiculous life had become. I used to imagine marriage as laughter, shared dreams, road trips. Turns out, it was more like Shark Tank, except the sharks lived with you and critiqued your grocery list. And yet, even through the absurdity, a strained calm washed over me. I realized this was freedom disguised as insult. Claire thought she was asserting dominance. I saw an opportunity for poetic justice. You don't take back power by shouting, you do it by smiling, waiting, and letting their ego write the ending. The night air coming through the window smelled like rain and possibility. I sat there listening to the faint hum of the city and the louder hum of my fridge, probably judging me too, and thought she's going to regret this by Sunday. See, Clara had this habit of underestimating me. In her mind, she was the ambitious executive, and I was the creative dreamer, which is wife code for unemployed philosopher with Wi-Fi. Never mind that my design firm had quietly landed contracts from 3 mid-tier tech companies. Clients she'd never noticed because they didn't wear suits or host champagne launches. She called my work freelancing. I called it financial survival. Tomato, tomato. Around 10 p.m., she walked back in, hair wrapped in a towel, looking like a spa commercial. "Lucas," she said, softer now, "don't take it the wrong way. I just think separating our budgets will make things more transparent." "Sure," I said. "Transparency's good, like glass. Fragile, but revealing." She frowned. "Can we be mature about this?" "Of course," I said with the calm of a man secretly planning a counterattack. "Just let me know which expenses fall under the new regime. Meals, utilities, emotional support." She sighed. "Stop joking." I smiled wider. "Can't. It's how I cope with capitalism." She rolled her eyes and walked off to bed. I sat there finishing my drink, staring at the flickering candle that had survived dinner's emotional bloodbath. Somewhere in the background, her parents' voices replayed in my head. A bit dry, pedestrian. Yeah, that sounded about right for the evening. I cleaned up the dishes, because unlike Clara's board members, I actually finish what I start, then poured myself another drink and leaned on the counter. That's when it hit me. If she wanted to separate finances, fine. But I'd separate contributions too. Every meal, every errand, every chore she'd ever ignored, all of it was about to get billed. The realization made me laugh. Out loud. Hard. The kind of laugh that makes you sound slightly unhinged but very self-aware. "Separate budgets," I muttered, shaking my head. "Okay, Clara, let's see who lasts longer without subsidies." I imagined her Sunday morning face when she realized she'd have to grocery shop alone, carry her own Trader Joe's bags, and maybe even, God forbid, pump gas. The same woman who once called Costco the ninth circle of hell would now navigate its aisles like a lost pilgrim. I went to bed with that image in my head, her standing in line, fumbling with coupons. Sleep came easy. The next morning, Clara acted normal, which meant she was plotting something. She hummed while making her smoothie, kale, spirulina, resentment, and said, "Don't forget we have dinner with the Chambers next week." "Oh," I said, pretending to scroll my phone. "Do I need to budget for that?" She froze, then smiled tightly. "Funny." "I try," I said, sipping coffee like it was victory. That evening, she texted me a spreadsheet, no joke, outlining her financial independence plan. Categories, percentages, color-coded graphs. She even used her company's font. I almost applauded. It was impressive, in a dystopian sort of way. I replied with a thumbs-up emoji. 5 minutes later, she texted, "This is serious, Lucas." I texted back, "So is inflation." She didn't respond after that. Probably drafting a press release titled, "CEO Initiates Marital Cost-Cutting Measures." But me? I spent that night grinning like a man who just saw the stock market crash for everyone but him, because somewhere deep inside I knew what she didn't. Control is addictive and withdrawals are ugly. By Sunday, she'd regret it. I didn't know exactly how yet, but I was already planning the emotional equivalent of a corporate audit. And if there's one thing Clara taught me after years of board meetings, brand launches, and condescending smiles, it's this. No empire collapses from sabotage. It collapses from arrogance. So I raised my glass to her declaration, to my quiet revenge, and to the beautiful chaos brewing ahead. Here's to separate budgets, I whispered. May they buy you a front row seat to reality. You ever wake up one morning and realize you've become a decorative item in your own house? That was me, Lucas Reynolds, premium background husband. My wife Clara didn't see me as a partner anymore. No, I was an unpaid intern in the corporate branch of Our Marriage, Inc. My responsibilities included meal prep, emotional maintenance, and crisis management. My compensation package? Occasional gratitude, and one yearly birthday card signed Love C. It wasn't always like that. Once upon a time, we were that nauseatingly cute couple everyone envied. We had inside jokes, stayed up late binge-watching shows, and even had synchronized toothbrush moments. But somewhere between her first $1 million investment round and her 10th female founders interview, she started seeing me as part of her overhead. Clara loved buzzwords. Her life was a walking TED Talk. Every conversation sounded like a leadership podcast. Lucas, we need synergy. Lucas, what? We should align on expectations. Lucas, you're not leveraging your potential. She didn't talk to me. She evaluated me. One time, I told her, honey, you talk to me like I'm your employee. She smiled and said, that's because you're the only one I can't fire. Cute, right? Yeah. Real knee slapper. Her latest crusade was this financial independence thing. She'd read one too many self-help books written by women who divorced their husbands and bought villas in Tuscany. Now everything in our marriage had a KPI. She even suggested we schedule intimacy once a week. Thursday nights, 9:30 p.m. sharp. She sent me an Outlook invite titled Strategic Connection. I declined it. The more successful she got, the more invisible I became. She wasn't mean, just clinically detached. She had a board of directors smile and eyes that constantly scanned for profit margins. Meanwhile, I was over here trying to decide if we'd run out of milk. When I did speak up, she treated my words like background noise. I'd say, babe, the sink's leaking. And she'd respond, you know what's really leaking? Market confidence. I swear, I could have been on fire and she would have said, this is a good opportunity to practice self-soothing. It wasn't just Clara, though. The disease spread to her friends. Each one an entrepreneur with an Instagram bio that said something like manifesting legacy and limitless living. They love to talk about supportive partners while sipping champagne purchased with investor money. I used to hang around them during gatherings, smiling like a friendly hostage, until one day I realized I was the only husband still attending. The others had either escaped or filed for emotional bankruptcy. But see, I was different. I wasn't going to explode or storm out dramatically. That's not my style. I believe in slow, sarcastic revenge, the kind that brews quietly, like good whiskey or bad Wi-Fi. It started small. I stopped trying so hard to impress her. No more surprise breakfasts or fixing her printer at midnight. You'd be amazed how fast people panic when the help stops helping. The morning after her separate budgets declaration, she asked why the espresso machine wasn't working. I told her, budget cuts. She didn't laugh. I did. The irony was, she always acted like she carried the relationship financially, which was wild, because half the mortgage was paid from my grandfather's inheritance, money she conveniently labeled a family contribution. I remember the night I brought it up. I said, technically my side funded this house. She barely looked up from her MacBook and said, that was a gift, Lucas. My income sustains the lifestyle. Lifestyle, as if my blood, sweat, and emotional trauma were accessories in her curated existence. I make more coffee than Starbucks, mow the lawn, take out the trash, fix the Wi-Fi, and keep the emotional thermostat steady. And she calls it lifestyle. It got to a point where I realized I wasn't her husband anymore. I was an unpaid brand consultant. My feedback mattered only if it aligned with her narrative. Clara had this favorite phrase, I built this life from scratch. She'd say it in interviews, at dinner parties, on LinkedIn, like she'd personally invented air. One night, after hearing it for the 1,000th time, I finally said, sweetheart, you didn't build it from scratch. You built it from my credit score and my inheritance. She froze, then gave me that tight CEO smile, the one that could curdle milk. That's not funny. Oh, I wasn't joking, I said. We didn't talk for 2 days after that. Honestly, it was the most peaceful 48 hours of my life. The truth is, I'd stopped needing her approval a long time ago. The only thing I wanted from her now was honesty, and maybe for her to remember I existed outside of tax season. But she couldn't see it. She was too high on validation. Every time her company hit a milestone, she'd do that little "I'm thriving" speech on social media, complete with a filtered selfie and hashtags like had boss energy and unstoppable. Meanwhile, I was in the background, literally unstoppable because no one had noticed I was still there. I became an expert in invisibility. When she hosted her mindful dinner parties, I played the ghost chef. I'd cook, serve, and disappear before the guests arrived. Clara always took the credit. "Oh, I whipped this up myself," she'd say, as if sautéing onions counted as entrepreneurship. Her friends would coo, "Clara, you're amazing, you do it all." And I'd be in the kitchen doorway, wiping my hands, thinking, "Lady, the only thing she did was text me to defrost the chicken." Sometimes I'd hear them gossip. One of them, Veronica, once said, "Lucas seems so domesticated." Clara laughed. "He's comfortable." Comfortable. Like an old couch or a background app. At some point, I stopped existing as a husband and started existing as a system. One that handled logistics, emotions, and home maintenance. I was an Alexa device with better sarcasm. What made it worse was how she'd parade me at events. To the outside world, we were the perfect couple, her in her tailored suits, me in my creative husband chic attire. She loved using me as proof that she could have it all. But the moment we got home, it was like she unplugged me. The spotlight went off and I went back to standby mode. There's a special kind of exhaustion that comes from being unseen by the one person who's supposed to know you best. You start doubting your own relevance. You start measuring your worth in chores completed instead of love received. One night, after another of her working late evenings, she came home past midnight smelling like champagne and self-importance. I was on the couch watching reruns of The Office, because irony is my coping mechanism. She dropped her purse, kicked off her heels, and said, "You're still up?" I shrugged. "Can't sleep without the sound of your ambition echoing through the halls." She rolled her eyes. "Don't be dramatic." "I'm not. I'm just documenting." "Documenting what?" she asked. "The gradual fading of a husband," I said, turning back to the TV. That one hit her. She stood there for a second, maybe realizing she couldn't remember the last time she'd asked how my day was. Then she said, "You're being passive-aggressive." "No, Clara," I said, smiling. "This is full-blown aggressive, just with better vocabulary." She didn't laugh. She never laughed anymore. That's when I started taking mental notes, little observations, moments that defined our invisible war. Like how she always introduced herself as Clara Reynolds instead of Clara Turner. Or how she corrected people when they called her Mrs. She'd say, "Just Clara's fine." Yeah, we got that memo. And then there was the money talk. Every month she'd send me a budget summary email like I was part of accounting. It started with, "Lucas, for transparency," and ended with passive-aggressive remarks like, "Please manage your personal expenses accordingly." I was half tempted to reply, "Please manage your condescension accordingly." At first, I thought I was overreacting, that maybe I was too sensitive, too old-fashioned. But then I remembered what her assistant, Jenna, accidentally said during a company event. She'd had one too many martinis and leaned in whispering, "You're so sweet to still be around. Most men in your position would have left by now." I laughed then, but on the drive home, that line sat in my chest like a brick. Still be around. That's what I'd become, an accessory that outstayed its trend cycle. The next morning, I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the guy staring back. I'd traded ambition for accommodation. I'd built her empire's foundation while mine quietly crumbled. That's when something inside me shifted. I realized the only thing worse than being invisible was continuing to pretend you weren't. So I made a quiet promise. I'd stop auditioning for her approval. If she wanted independence, I'd give it to her, so thoroughly that she'd feel the absence like a missing heartbeat. I'd let her see what financial independence really looked like when emotional dependence packed up and left. I didn't yell, I didn't confront, I just disengaged. The polite rebellion of a man who's done explaining his worth. And as I watched her rush through another morning, hair perfect, voice crisp, barking orders into her phone, I realized something both sad and liberating. Claire had built an empire, but she'd lost her kingdom. And the invisible husband she'd ignored? He was finally starting to see himself again. You know that saying, don't go to bed angry? Yeah, well, I went to bed furious and woke up inspired. It's funny how resentment can fuel productivity. Most people meditate when they can't sleep. Me? I build spreadsheets. Call it the millennial man's revenge therapy. It was 1:12 a.m. on Saturday, and the house was so quiet I could hear the sound of Claire's ego humming in the next room. She'd fallen asleep after another long session of strategic self-care, which, near as I could tell, involved expensive lotions and deleting my opinions. Meanwhile, I sat at my desk with my laptop glowing like the bat signal of pettiness. The title of the document, Invoice for Services Rendered. Oh, it was beautiful. A masterpiece in passive-aggressive financial literacy. I chose her company's official font, Montserrat semi-bold, and her corporate colors, tranquil blue for professionalism and cold gray for suppressed rage. I even added her logo at the top left corner just to give it that authentic, from your husband, the unpaid department vibe. I started typing categories. Personal chef, 6 HRs a week, $300 chauffeur for your mom's Pilates classes, $200 tech support, marital discount applied, $150 emotional damage tax, TBD. And beneath that, a note in italics. Payment due upon realization of guilt. I laughed so hard, I woke the dog 2 houses away. The beauty of it wasn't just the math, it was the principle. Clara had turned our marriage into an audit. So fine, I'd give her the cleanest financial breakdown of her life. If she wanted independence, I'd itemize the hell out of it. I scrolled through years of unpaid labor in my head, mowing lawns, fixing Wi-Fi, hosting her parents, attending her networking dinners, where I basically played the role of a luxury prop. Once, she even had me pose in a marketing photo shoot for her company's family wellness campaign. I wasn't credited, just cropped out later for brand cohesion. That's when I added another line. Uncredited brand ambassador per campaign. 400, oh, it felt divine. By 2 a.m., I was deep in the zone, eyes bloodshot, fingers flying. The glow of the screen made me look like a vengeful accountant from hell. I kept whispering to myself, billable hours, baby. For flair, I included pie charts. One showed how much of her success was powered by my unpaid labor. Another showed her emotional withdrawals versus deposits. Spoiler alert, heavy overdraft. I even created a column called Maintenance Costs of Being Married to Clara, which included pretending her parents are interesting and complimenting her candle business idea. Each row was a poetic act of rebellion. At around 2:45, I made the mistake of checking her company website. Her latest blog post was titled, The Power of Self-Reliance in Relationships. I nearly choked on my coffee. The woman who once called me at work because she couldn't figure out how to open a PDF was preaching self-reliance. So, naturally, I added, Technical Emergency Hotline, 24/7, $175 a month subscription. You have to understand, this wasn't revenge. This was therapy, in Excel form. Every dollar I typed felt like reclaiming an inch of dignity. Every subtotal was a declaration of independence. By 3 a.m., I sat back, staring at the spreadsheet. It looked like something you'd present in court or maybe frame above your fireplace. I even added a footer. Prepared with love and justified resentment by Lucas Turner, Husband & Co. I closed the laptop and exhaled. The weight in my chest had lifted. I didn't even care if she saw it, though a small, dark part of me hoped she would. Now I know what you're thinking. Lucas, why not just talk to her? Because conversations with Clara were like arguing with a motivational poster. No matter what you said, she'd twist it into a life lesson. I could tell her she'd burn dinner and she'd reply, sometimes we must embrace imperfection to find balance. So yeah, spreadsheets were safer. I crawled into bed quietly, and for once, I slept like a man who'd filed an emotional tax return. Morning came with that crisp Saturday sunlight that makes suburban neighborhoods look friendlier than they actually are. I made coffee, fried some bacon, and sat at the kitchen counter, flipping through my notes, waiting for her to wake up. At 8:30, the bedroom door opened. Clara appeared in her silk robe, hair in a messy bun that somehow looked curated. Morning, she said flatly. Morning, I replied, cheerful. Maybe too cheerful, she narrowed her eyes. You're in a good mood. Yep, freedom suits me. She poured herself a smoothie, something green and smug, and sat across from me. So, she said, have you thought more about our financial independence plan? Oh, absolutely, I said, sipping coffee. In fact, I've itemized it. She frowned. You what? I made a spreadsheet. Her eyes flicked up, suspicious. Of course you did. Yep, full cost analysis of everything I bring to this partnership. Labor, logistics, emotional endurance, the works. She stared at me, lips pressed tight. You're joking. Oh, I wish I was, I said, grinning. But hey, you're the one who loves clarity and accountability, and I'm just embracing your core values. I showed her the laptop. Her expression went from curious to horrified in under 10 seconds. I could practically hear her brain buffering. You actually made this? She asked. Corporate formatting and everything. Even used your company's Pantone code. Her jaw clenched. This is childish. No, I corrected. This is transparent accounting, Clara. You wanted independence? I'm just quantifying mine. She scrolled through it, her face tightening at every row. When she hit emotional damage tax, she said, what does this even mean? It's pending audit, I said. You're ridiculous, and yet surprisingly organized. I could tell she was torn between fury and disbelief. For a woman who spent her life controlling narratives, this was one she couldn't spin. Lucas, she said sharply, you can't possibly expect me to take this seriously. Why not? You take everything else seriously. I figured I'd meet you where you live. Spreadsheets and control. She opened her mouth, closed it again, then muttered something under her breath that sounded like immature. I smiled. Maybe, but I'm finally getting paid for it. She slammed the laptop shut and stood. I have a meeting in an hour. I don't have time for your theatrics. Right, of course, I said. Because God forbid emotional labor interferes with your wellness brand. She glared at me for a full 10 seconds before marching off. The robe flared behind her like an offended cape. As soon as she was gone, I reopened the laptop and added one final line. Crisis de-escalation services. Post-argument, 250 HR, click, save, satisfaction. Around noon, my buddy Sam dropped by. He's been my best friend since college and the kind of guy who thinks emotional advice should come with beer. He walked in, looked at me sitting there in my boxers, laughing at a spreadsheet, and said, Man, you look like you've finally snapped. I call it self-invoicing, I said, turning the screen toward him. He scrolled through it, whistled. Damn, this is savage. You actually charged her for emotional damage? Market rate. He cracked up. Bro, this is genius. You should post it online. I'm saving it for the right audience, I said, smirking, like her mom. That got him laughing so hard, he nearly choked on his drink. You're playing a dangerous game, he said eventually. Yeah, I replied. But for the first time, it feels like my game, because that's the thing about people like Clara. They build kingdoms assuming you'll never realize you're the one laying the bricks. Once you stop, the walls start to crack. Later that evening, I printed the invoice and pinned it to the fridge, not out of pettiness. Okay, slight pettiness, but mainly symbolism. That paper wasn't just a joke. It was proof that I existed, that my work had value, that I wasn't just a background asset in her empire. When Clara came home that night, she didn't mention it. She just gave it the kind of side eye usually reserved for moldy leftovers. I didn't say a word either. We just coexisted in tense silence, two employees on different shifts in the same collapsing company. And as I lay in bed later, listening to her type emails at midnight, like the glow of her screen was oxygen, I realized something monumental. She thought my spreadsheet was satire. It wasn't. It was prophecy. Because soon enough, Clara Reynolds was going to learn the real cost of underestimating a man with time, sarcasm, and Excel. Saturday morning came with a kind of peace that felt suspicious, like when a toddler's quiet for too long. Usually, weekends in our house meant chaos disguised as productivity. Clara's wellness routine started at sunrise. Meditation, emails, and judgment, all before 9 a.m. But that morning, I woke up before her, rolled over, and realized I didn't care. I lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling fan spinning like the wheel of misfortune, and smiled. Today, I wasn't the unpaid intern of Clara Reynolds Enterprises. Today, I was the CEO of me. I rolled out of bed, stretched, and decided that if I was going to live under the new separate budgets regime, I might as well make it ceremonial. My first act of independence? Breakfast, made for one. No kale, no smoothies, no gut-friendly oat sludge. Nope, today was about pancakes, bacon, and coffee black enough to insult her entire brand. The sizzle of bacon felt spiritual. I stacked pancakes like an offering to freedom, poured syrup like rebellion, and turned on the TV loud enough to break her quiet morning energy. I wasn't trying to start a fight. I was simply honoring my autonomy with butter. Clara walked in around 8:30, wearing her signature "I'm better than you but calm about it" face, silk robe, hair perfect, smelling like wealth and detachment. "You're very chipper this morning," she said, eyeing the plate in front of me. "Freedom does that to a man," I replied, cutting into my pancakes with the same precision I used to cut through her excuses. She folded her arms. "You're making a mess." "Occupational hazard," I said, mouthful. "I'm serious, Lucas. There's syrup on the counter." "Ah," I nodded solemnly. "Collateral damage in the war for independence." She glared. "You're really going to be like this?" "Like what?" I asked innocently. "Happy?" That glare could have curdled almond milk. Normally I'd cave, apologize, pretend I didn't notice the emotional landmine. But this time, I just smiled and went back to my meal. Silence stretched between us, heavy, awkward, oddly empowering. She tried to fill it with small talk. "My parents are coming tomorrow. We'll need to get groceries." "Oh, I already did," I said. "Good," she replied, softening slightly. "Did you get the usual?" "Nope." Her face froze. "What do you mean, like, nope? I got what I wanted, and, part of this whole separate budget initiative. You handle your shopping, I handle mine." "You're joking," I smiled. Would a man who bought ribeye steak, Belgian beer, and hot sauce look like he's joking? The silence that followed was art. You could frame it and hang it in the Museum of Petty Triumphs. I finished my breakfast, rinsed my plate, and walked to the fridge. When I opened it, the light illuminated my masterpiece, a lineup of glorious, for me groceries, each labeled with a bright sticky note, property of Lucas Turner, independent assets, not for corporate use. She just stood there, blinking like she'd seen a ghost. "What is this?" she asked. "A visual representation of your new policy." "You labeled your food?" "Of course, transparency, right? You said it yourself, clarity is key." She looked like she was calculating the cost of divorce lawyers by the minute. "You're being childish." "No, Clara," I said, smiling sweetly. "I'm being compliant." That's the thing about people like her. They love control until you start following their rules with enthusiasm. I grabbed my beer from the fridge, cracked it open, and said, "Well, enjoy your shopping trip. I've got a full schedule of relaxation ahead." She blinked. "You're drinking beer at 10 a.m.? According to my budget, yes." I left her there, frozen between fury and disbelief, and went to sit outside on the porch. The autumn air felt different, lighter, like freedom had oxygen. I watched neighbors walking their dogs, kids biking, the world spinning on like none of them knew a quiet marital revolution was happening behind my front door. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't thinking about how to keep Clara happy. I was thinking about myself, my wants, my peace. It was like realizing you'd been holding your breath for years. Around noon, I heard her car start. A few minutes later, she drove off, probably to restock on overpriced organic nonsense and resentment. I went back inside, turned on some music, and danced in the kitchen while flipping another batch of pancakes. If she'd walked in, I would have told her it was part of my new mental wellness initiative. The rest of the day, I leaned fully into my independence arc. No house chores, no teamwork discussions. Just me, my laptop, and a marathon of comfort TV. It felt almost illegal to relax without guilt. Around 4 p.m., my phone buzzed. It was a text from her. "What do you want for dinner tomorrow? My parents expect a full meal." I stared at the message for a second, then typed back, "Separate budgets, separate meals." The dots appeared, disappeared, reappeared, then vanished entirely. I leaned back, grinning. She was stewing somewhere between confusion and panic. For someone who ran a multi-million-dollar company, she didn't handle real-life consequences well. By the evening, she was back. I could hear the front door slam, the sound of grocery bags hitting the counter, and the unmistakable sigh of someone who'd had to navigate Costco alone. Music to my ears. She walked into the living room. "I can't believe you didn't help me today." "Believe it," I said, not looking up from my screen. "I had to carry 6 bags by myself." "Should have budgeted for delivery service," I said. "Lucas!" I finally looked up, calm as ever. "Clara, you said you wanted independence. I'm just respecting that. Or is that only fun when it's theoretical?" For a second, she didn't speak. Then she said something that almost made me laugh. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" "Immensely." She stomped off toward the kitchen, muttering about immaturity and emotional manipulation. I didn't care, because beneath all that fury was realization, and realization is the first step toward humility. Later that night, I caught her in the kitchen cooking. That was rare. Normally, Clara's version of cooking involved delegating tasks or placing DoorDash orders in bulk. But there she was, fumbling with utensils, checking YouTube videos on her phone. I leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. "Need help?" "No," she said curtly. "I'm fine." "Sure?" "Yes." 10 minutes later, the smoke alarm went off. I walked in slowly, savoring the moment like fine wine. "Smells like independence," I said. She glared at me through the haze, holding a burnt pan like it had betrayed her personally. "You're impossible." "And yet," I said, waving the smoke away, "I'm thriving." That's when I realized she wasn't just angry, she was rattled. Clara had built her identity around competence, control, and perfection. Watching that facade crack was like watching the CEO of Apple forget her password. I didn't gloat. Okay, maybe a little. I just smiled and said, "Don't worry, you'll get the hang of it. Everyone burns their first meal post-merger." She said nothing, just dumped the pan in the sink and walked away. By midnight, the house was silent again. But it wasn't tense. It was peaceful, like the air had cleared. I sat in the dark, beer in hand, reflecting on how bizarrely liberating it felt to stop performing. I'd spent years walking on eggshells, trying to keep a marriage balanced on her terms. Now I was finally letting those eggs crack. At one point, I heard her moving around upstairs, opening drawers, sighing loudly, her way of signaling disapproval without confrontation. Normally, I'd rush up, play peacekeeper. Tonight, I stayed put. She could hold her own board meeting with her conscience. When I finally went to bed, she was lying there awake, scrolling through her phone like it owed her answers. I slipped under the covers silently. After a few minutes, she said, "I don't like this." "Like what?" "This weirdness, this distance." I stared at the ceiling. "You started it, Clara. I just wanted fairness." "And you got it," I said. "Fairness means boundaries, budgets, consequences, the full package." She didn't reply. I think part of her wanted to fight, but another part realized she'd already lost control of the narrative. As I drifted off, I couldn't help but smile. She'd built a world where everything had to be branded, budgeted, and optimized. But you can't optimize emotion. You can't spreadsheet love. And you sure as hell can't turn a marriage into a merger without losing something human along the way. That night, I dreamed of laughter, space, and a fridge full of steak with my name on it. When I woke up, I knew one thing for certain. Tomorrow, Sunday, was going to be historic. Because the Turners were coming over. And if Clara thought Saturday silence was uncomfortable, she hadn't seen anything yet. Saturday morning came with a kind of peace that felt suspicious, like when a toddler's quiet for too long. Usually, weekends in our house has meant chaos disguised as productivity. Clara's wellness routine started at sunrise: meditation, emails, and judgment, all before 9 a.m. But that morning, I woke up before her, rolled over, and realized I didn't care. I lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling fan spinning like the wheel of misfortune, and smiled. Today, I wasn't the unpaid intern of Clara Reynolds Enterprises. Today, I was the CEO of me. I rolled out of bed, stretched, and decided that if I was going to live under the new separate budgets regime, I might as well make it ceremonial. My first act of independence? Breakfast, made for one. No kale, no smoothies, no gut-friendly oat sludge. Nope. Today was about pancakes, bacon, and coffee black enough to insult her entire brand. The sizzle of bacon felt spiritual. I stacked pancakes like an offering to freedom, poured syrup like rebellion, and turned on the TV loud enough to break her quiet morning energy. I wasn't trying to start a fight. I was simply honoring my autonomy with butter. Clara walked in around 8:30 wearing her signature "I'm better than you but calm about it" face. Silk robe, hair perfect, smelling like wealth and detachment. "You're very chipper this morning," she said, eyeing the plate in front of me. "Freedom does that to a man," I replied, cutting into my pancakes with the same precision I used to cut through her excuses. She folded her arms. "You're making a mess." "Occupational hazard," I said, mouth full. "I'm serious, Lucas. There's syrup on the counter." "Ah," I nodded solemnly. "Collateral damage in the war for independence." She glared. "You're really gonna be like this?" "Like what?" I asked innocently. "Happy?" That glare could have curdled almond milk. Normally I'd cave, apologize, pretend I didn't notice the emotional landmine. But this time, I just smiled and went back to my meal. Silence stretched between us, heavy, awkward, oddly empowering. She tried to fill it with small talk. "My parents are coming tomorrow. We'll need to get groceries." "Oh, I already did," I said. "Good," she replied, softening slightly. "Did you get the usual?" "Nope." Her face froze. "What do you mean, nope? I got what I wanted. You know, part of this whole separate budget initiative. You handle your shopping, I handle mine." "You're joking," I smiled. Would a man who bought ribeye steak, Belgian beer, and hot sauce look like he's joking? The silence that followed was art. You could frame it and hang it in the Museum of Petty Triumphs. I finished my breakfast, rinsed my plate, and walked to the fridge. When I opened it, the light illuminated my masterpiece, a lineup of glorious, for me groceries, each labeled with a bright sticky note. Property of Lucas Turner. Independent assets, not for corporate use. She just stood there, blinking like she'd seen a ghost. "What is this?" she asked. "A visual representation of your new policy. You labeled your food." "Of course. Transparency, right? You said it yourself. Clarity is key." She looked like she was calculating the cost of divorce lawyers by the minute. "You're being childish." "No, Clara," I said, smiling sweetly. "I'm being compliant." That's the thing about people like her. They love control until you start following their rules with enthusiasm. I grabbed my beer from the fridge, cracked it open, and said, "Well, enjoy your shopping trip. I've got a full schedule of relaxation ahead." She blinked. "You're drinking beer at 10 a.m.? According to my budget, yes." I left her there, frozen between fury and disbelief, and went to sit outside on the porch. The autumn air felt different, lighter, like freedom had oxygen. I watched neighbors walking their dogs, kids biking, the world spinning on like none of them knew a quiet marital revolution was happening behind my front door. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't thinking about how to keep Clara happy. I was thinking about myself, my wants, my peace. It was like realizing you'd been holding your breath for years. Around noon, I heard her car start. A few minutes later, she drove off, probably to restock on overpriced organic nonsense and resentment. I went back inside, turned on some music, and danced in the kitchen while flipping another batch of pancakes. If she'd walked in, I would have told her it was part of my new mental wellness initiative. The rest of the day, I leaned fully into my independence arc. No house chores, no teamwork discussions, just me, my laptop, and a marathon of comfort TV. It felt almost illegal to relax without guilt. Around 4 p.m., my phone buzzed. It was a text from her. "What do you want for dinner tomorrow? My parents expect a full meal." I stared at the message for a second, then typed back, "Separate budgets, separate meals." The dots appeared, disappeared, reappeared, then vanished entirely. I leaned back, grinning. She was stewing somewhere between confusion and panic. For someone who ran a multi-million-dollar company, she didn't handle real-life consequences well. By the evening, she was back. I could hear the front door slam, the sound of grocery bags hitting the counter, and the unmistakable sigh of someone who'd had to navigate Costco alone. Music to my ears. She walked into the living room. "I can't believe you didn't help me today." "Believe it," I said, not looking up from my screen. "I had to carry 6 bags by myself." "Should have budgeted for delivery service," I said. "Lucas!" I finally looked up, calm as ever. "Clara, you said you wanted independence. I'm just respecting that. Or is that only fun when it's theoretical?" For a second, she didn't speak. Then she said something that almost made me laugh. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" "Immensely." She stomped off toward the kitchen, muttering about immaturity and emotional manipulation. I didn't care, because beneath all that fury was realization, and realization is the first step toward humility. Later that night, I caught her in the kitchen cooking. That was rare. Normally, Clara's version of cooking involved delegating tasks or placing DoorDash orders in bulk. But there she was, fumbling with utensils, checking YouTube videos on her phone. I leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. "Need help?" "No," she said curtly. "I'm fine." "Sure?" "Yes." 10 minutes later, the smoke alarm went off. I walked in slowly, savoring the moment like fine wine. "Smells like independence," I said. She glared at me through the haze, holding a burnt pan like it had betrayed her personally. "You're impossible." "And yet," I said, waving the smoke away, "I'm thriving." That's when I realized she wasn't just angry, she was rattled. Clara had built her identity around competence, control, and perfection. Watching that facade crack was like watching the CEO of Apple forget her password. I didn't gloat. Okay, maybe a little. I just smiled and said, "Don't worry, you'll get the hang of it. Everyone burns their first meal post-merger." She said nothing, just dumped the pan in the sink and walked away. By midnight, the house was silent again. But it wasn't tense. It was peaceful, like the air had cleared. I sat in the dark, beer in hand, reflecting on how bizarrely liberating it felt to stop performing. I'd spent years walking on eggshells, trying to keep a marriage balanced on her terms. Now I was finally letting those eggs crack. At one point, I heard her moving around upstairs, opening drawers, sighing loudly, her way of signaling disapproval without confrontation. Normally, I'd rush up, play peacekeeper. Tonight, I stayed put. She could hold her own board meeting with her conscience. When I finally went to bed, she was lying there awake, scrolling through her phone like it owed her answers. I slipped under the covers silently. After a few minutes, she said, "I don't like this." "Like what?" "This weirdness, this distance." I stared at the ceiling. "You started it, Clara? I just wanted fairness. And you got it," I said. "Fairness means boundaries, budgets, consequences, the full package." She didn't reply. I think part of her wanted to fight, but another part realized she'd already lost control of the narrative. As I drifted off, I couldn't help but smile. She'd built a world where everything had to be branded, budgeted, and optimized. But you can't optimize emotion. You can't spreadsheet love. And you sure as hell can't turn a marriage into a merger without losing something human along the way. That night, I dreamed of laughter, space, and a fridge full of steak with my name on it. When I woke up, I knew one thing for certain. Tomorrow, Sunday, was going to be historic because the Turners were coming over, and if Clara thought Saturday silence was uncomfortable, she hadn't seen anything yet. Sunday mornings are supposed to be calm. Birds chirping, coffee brewing, maybe a little jazz in the background. Ours started with silence. Not the peaceful kind. The kind that hums with unspoken threats. The kind that says, something's about to blow up and it's not the coffee pot. The Turners, Claire's parents, were coming over for lunch. That sentence alone should qualify for emotional hazard pay. Margaret Turner, professional critic and part-time human smoke detector, and Henry Turner, retired banker turned walking spreadsheet, were punctual to the minute. If they said 1 o'clock, you could set your watch to their judgment. Normally, I'd spend Sunday mornings prepping their elite dining experience. Slow roasting, garnishing, making sure Margaret had a gluten-free, joy-free option. I'd even light candles to mask the scent of my resentment. But this wasn't a normal Sunday. This was post-budget war Sunday, and I was a new man. I woke up at 9, stretched, and decided to let the universe handle lunch. Clara was already awake, pacing the kitchen like a general before a battle. She had a grocery bag in one hand and panic in her eyes. "You haven't started?" she said when she saw me walk in, coffee mug in hand. "Started what?" "Lunch! My parents will be here in 4 hours." "Oh, I know," I said, taking a sip. "I put it on my calendar under not my problem." She blinked. "You're kidding." "Nope. Separate budgets, separate responsibilities. I'm just following the new corporate guidelines." The sound she made could have stripped paint. "Lucas, don't do this." "Do what? Adhere to policy?" She set the grocery bag down so hard the apples rebelled. You're being ridiculous. And you're being controlling, I said calmly. Balance, right? Yin and yang. She opened her mouth to argue but closed it again. I could see it, the slow realization creeping in that I wasn't bluffing. For years, Claire had been the one with the plan, the schedule, the control, but she'd never faced me without my apron and compliance. This was new territory, and judging by the way her jaw twitched, she didn't like it one bit. At exactly 11 a.m., I was sitting on the couch, laptop open, watching a documentary about lions. Because nothing says healthy marriage like watching a pride devour a zebra while your wife implodes in the kitchen. The irony was beautiful. Lucas, she called, voice sharp. Can you at least set the table? Sure, I said without looking up. Set it for how many? Just you and your parents, right? Separate dining budgets. She stomped into the living room. This isn't funny. I turned the volume up a little. You're right, it's hilarious. Her hands went to her hips. You're trying to embarrass me. No, Clara, I'm just giving you the independence you asked for. Consider it immersive learning. She stood there, glaring for a full 10 seconds before storming back into the kitchen. Somewhere in there, a pot clattered to the floor. I smiled, the sound of progress. By noon, she'd gone from stressed to frantic. I heard the blender, the oven, the occasional curse word she usually replaced with ugh in polite company. I considered helping, then remembered the spreadsheet taped to the fridge that clearly said independent meal prep, Clara's responsibility. Instead, I opened another beer and watched the clock. I knew the Turners would arrive exactly at 1, wearing judgment like designer cologne. And I couldn't wait. At 12:58, the doorbell rang, of course. Punctuality runs in their DNA. Clara wiped her hands, straightened her dress, and whispered, Please, just behave. Define behave, I said. Don't make this worse. Worse? Oh, no, Clara. This is me improving communication. She gave me that tight CEO smile, the one that hides panic behind teeth. Then she opened the door. There they were, the Turners in all their glory. Henry with his pressed beige blazer and permanent squint, like the world was a poorly written report. Margaret clutching her purse like it contained state secrets. Clara, darling, Margaret sang, stepping in. Oh, it smells interesting. Henry sniffed the air. Is that paprika? It's an experiment, Clara said, forcing a laugh. A new recipe. Ah, Henry nodded. Brave. I was leaning against the counter, beer in hand, watching like a man front row at a comedy show. Welcome, folks. Margaret glanced at me and offered that smile mothers-in-law reserve for people they don't think deserve their daughter. Lucas, how are you? Financially independent, I said. Clara shot me a warning look so sharp it could have sliced bread. Margaret's smile faltered. Oh, good for you? Henry peered around the kitchen. No roast this time, Lucas? I shrugged. Budget cuts. Silence. Beautiful, uncomfortable silence. Clara rushed to fill it. We thought we'd do something lighter today. Margaret's eyes landed on the counter. Half-cooked vegetables, a confused salad, and something in the oven that looked more like a crime scene than a casserole. Oh, she said. Well, it certainly looks intentional. Henry adjusted his glasses. Did you burn something? I took another sip of beer. Just expectations. Clara's jaw tightened. I could see the vein in her temple pulsing to the rhythm of, Lucas, please stop talking. At one point, Margaret asked, So, Lucas, are you still doing freelance work? Oh, yes, I said cheerfully. I'm thriving, actually. And my next client might even be one of Clara's competitors. Henry nearly choked on his water. Clara froze mid-slice. I'm joking, I added, smiling. Mostly. The meal, or what passed for it, was a slow-motion disaster. Clara tried to serve everyone, pretending she wasn't melting inside while I just observed. Margaret pushed the food around her plate like it was a lab sample. This has texture, she said finally. Texture's good, Henry added quickly. Shows effort. Clara forced a laugh that sounded like it hurt. I leaned back, enjoying my plate of absolutely nothing. You're not eating? Margaret asked me. Oh, no, I said, patting my stomach. I've got my own groceries, ribeye waiting for me later. Separate meal plans, you know how it is. Margaret blinked. Separate what? Claire nearly dropped her fork. Lucas, I turned to her, all innocence. What? Transparency, right? Your parents should know about your exciting new marital policies. Henry looked at her, frowning. What's he talking about? Clara's smile froze. It's just something we're trying. Margaret leaned in, scandal lighting up her face like Christmas. You're dividing expenses with your husband? I nodded. She calls it financial independence. I call it a free trial of reality. Margaret gasped. Clara, dear, that's absurd. Henry adjusted his tie. That's not how partnerships work. Clara's eyes darted between them and me. It's empowering. Oh, it's empowering, all right, and I said, standing. I even empowered myself to stop cooking for everyone. Balance. Lucas! She sauteed, but it was too late. The words were out there, fluttering in the air like receipts after a refund. Margaret, horrified, turned toward the kitchen. Well, I'd at least like to see what's in the fridge. I almost laughed. I almost warned her. But fate deserved her moment. She strutted toward the fridge, heels clicking like a countdown timer. I leaned against the counter, watching. Clara whispered, Mom, maybe don't. But Margaret had already opened the door. What followed was silence, then a gasp that could have summoned emergency services. What is this? Clara froze. I sipped my beer. Inside the fridge was my magnum opus. Every food item labeled with neon sticky notes. Property of Lucas. Do not touch. Independent assets. Not under joint management. And taped to the inside of the door, perfectly centered, was my invoice for Sunday catering services. $450. I swear the birds flew off the roof. Dogs barked 2 houses down it. Somewhere a neighbor turned down their TV to hear better. Margaret clutched her pearls like they were her last line of defense. This is outrageous. Henry just stood there, blinking, probably recalculating the meaning of marriage. Clara whispered, Lucas, what the hell is wrong with you? I smiled, just ensuring accurate bookkeeping. The silence that followed could have been bottled and sold as pure tension. Margaret turned to Clara, voice trembling with scandal. Is this how you run your household? Clara opened her mouth, but nothing came out. For once, the great communicator had no words. I finished my beer and set it down gently and said, If you'll excuse me, I need to check on my independence. And with that, I walked out, calm, collected, victorious. Behind me, I could hear Clara trying to explain, her parents gasping like they'd witnessed a crime scene. The chaos was symphonic. As I stepped outside into the crisp afternoon air, I couldn't help but smile. Because that Sunday wasn't just a showdown. It was the first time Clara's empire of control actually cracked. And all I had to do was label my groceries. 1 o'clock. High noon for married people. The Turners were seated in our dining room, faces set like they'd been sculpted by disapproval itself. Clara hovered by the table, trying to pretend this was a normal Sunday meal and not a live stream meltdown. I was leaning against the doorframe with a beer in hand, watching the social collapse of a household I helped build. It was beautiful. Then it happened. The moment I didn't know I was waiting for, but would remember forever. Margaret Turner, a woman so composed she once complained that funerals were too casual, stood up and glided to the kitchen. Maybe she was looking for a salad dressing to save the disaster meal. Maybe she was hoping to find proof I'd been raised by wolves. Either way, she opened the fridge door like a queen expecting tribute. And then she screamed. Not a ladylike gasp or a small shriek. A full-body, opera-level scream that rattled the spices and sent our golden retriever into existential panic. You could feel it in your soul and probably hear it 3 blocks away. I swear birds took off from the roof. Somewhere, a car alarm went off in solidarity. And me? I just took a sip of beer and whispered, Showtime. What on earth is this? Margaret bellowed, pointing into the refrigerator like it had insulted her bloodline. Clara froze mid-sentence, eyes wide, and then sprinted over. Henry stood up slowly, his finance brain probably calculating the divorce cost per decibel. From where I stood, I could see the inside of the fridge, my private gallery of petty art. Sticky notes in neon colors plastered everywhere. Private property, independent meal prep, not under joint management. And my personal favorite, a bright orange note on the vegan butter that read, Budget Restricted. Front and center, taped to the door in bold font and corporate perfection, was my invoice for Sunday catering services, $450. The Turners stared as if I'd staged a crime scene. Margaret turned on me, horror in her eyes. "Lucas, explain yourself this instant." "Of course," I said pleasantly. "That's the new marital structure. Separate budgets mean I only cover my portion. If Clara wants a family meal, there's a service fee. It's all very transparent." Henry blinked. "Transparent? Crystal." I said, "Check the bottom. Discount applied for long-term clients." Margaret looked like she was about to faint into the condiments. "Clara, you cannot be serious." Clara snatched the invoice off the fridge, crumpled it, and hissed, "Lucas, you've gone too far." "Too far?" I raised a brow. "Sweetheart, we crossed too far when you called our marriage a budget line." She flushed red. Margaret pressed a hand to her chest. Henry rubbed his forehead like he was auditing the situation. Then came the neighbors. Because, of course, when someone screams loud enough to trigger car alarms, the entire neighborhood comes sniffing around like it's a Netflix premiere. Through the open window, I could see Mrs. Lang from next door peering over the hedge, phone in hand, ready to record. Fantastic. We were about to trend on next door. Clara realized it too and snapped, "Close the window!" I shrugged. Why? Transparency. Margaret was still ranting, something about decency and upbringing. "Henry, say something." Henry cleared his throat. "Well, technically, if they did agree to separate budgets—" "Henry," Margaret snapped. "Then this is a logical outcome," he finished sheepishly. I grinned. Finally, someone who understands the economics of emotional labor. Clara spun on me. "Stop being smug." "I'm not smug," I said. "I'm liberated." "Liberated?" Margaret echoed, like I'd just confessed to tax fraud. Clara looked ready to implode. Her voice shook. "Lucas, you need to apologize to my mother right now." "For what?" "Labeling my food?" "For being ridiculous." "Ah, so clarity is ridiculous now." I nodded gravely. "Got it. Noted for future team meetings." Margaret threw her hands up. "This is humiliating." Henry murmured, "Well, the labels are legible." If looks could kill, Henry would have been a widower before dessert. The whole scene was a symphony of disaster. Clara frantically trying to restore order, her parents debating the definition of marriage, and me sipping beer like I was judging a reality show called Who Wants to Be a Functional Family? Then came the moment that truly earned the chapter's title. Margaret opened the freezer. I'd forgotten about that part. She stared at it, frozen, no pun intended, before screaming again, even louder than before. The kind of scream that vibrates through drywall. Inside the freezer, among the ice packs and leftover pizza rolls, was a large sign I'd made at 2 a.m. the night before, in bold black letters, "Independent assets. Keep out of reach of control freaks." That one was for me. Margaret slammed the freezer shut and turned to Clara. "You married a madman!" I bowed slightly, certified and licensed. Clara was trembling now, half rage, half shock. "This isn't funny, Lucas. You've embarrassed me in front of my family." "Correction," I said. "You embarrassed yourself when you turned a marriage into a spreadsheet." She grabbed the fridge door handle and slammed it so hard the magnets rattled off. Enough, but the damage was done. Mrs. Lang was filming through the window, and I could already picture the caption, "Couple at 43 Elm Street debates late-stage capitalism via fridge." Clara noticed her too and groaned. "Oh my God, the neighbors are watching." "Well," I said, "tell them to take notes. Could save their marriages." Margaret snapped her handbag shut. "Henry, we're leaving." "Gladly," he murmured, already heading for the door. Clara rushed after them. "Mom, Dad, please, it's not what it looks like." "Oh, really?" Margaret turned back. "Because it looks like your husband is charging you rent for food," I called after her. "A service fee, actually, taxes included." The door slammed so hard the walls shook. Silence fell again, the kind that only happens after a nuclear event. You could hear the fridge humming in shock. Clara stood there, hands on her temples, eyes closed. For a moment, I almost felt bad, almost. Then she spoke, voice low and dangerous. "I hope you're happy." I grinned, ecstatic. She opened her eyes, glared at me, and said, "You've ruined everything." "No," I said, walking past her to grab another beer. "I just showed you what everything really costs." She didn't reply, just stood there, breathing hard. I half expected her to throw something, but instead she grabbed her keys and stormed out. The door slammed again. The second door in 10 minutes to file for retirement. And then it was just me. Me in the quiet. The scent of burnt vegetables still lingered. The fridge light flickered softly behind the notes, and I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. I wandered over to the window. Mrs. Lang was still out there, pretending to trim her roses while eyeing our house like a true crime enthusiast. I raised my beer in a toast. She pretended to cough. Then I laughed. A deep, honest laugh. The kind that comes from the gut after you've survived a small war. Because for the first time in our entire marriage, I had forced Clara Reynolds to see me. Not as her assistant, not as her support system, but as a man who refused to be managed. I sat on the couch, opened my laptop, and typed a new document title, After Action Report. Under it, I wrote, 1. Operation Budget Divide, Success. 2. Enemy Forces, Paternal Unit and Matriarch Turner, retreated. 3. Collateral damage, minimal, some burnt casserole, one neighbor's rosebush. 4. Morale, high. I was still smiling when my phone buzzed. A text from Sam. Dude, was that your wife's mom screaming? Half the street heard. I replied, yes, financial revolution achieved. You're insane, productively. After that, I took a nap on the couch like a man who just won a court case he didn't file. When I woke up around 6, the sun was setting and the house was still empty. Clara hadn't come back. Good. She needed time to sit with her reflection, and maybe with a budget spreadsheet that finally had a human cost column. I made myself a steak, cracked open another beer, and ate at the table alone. It was quiet, simple, and honest. No pretense, no performance. Just me and the sound of my own satisfaction. Halfway through the meal, the door opened. Clara walked in wearing that defeated look corporate executives get after a PR crisis. Her makeup was smudged, her eyes red. She stopped when she saw me. Enjoying yourself? She asked quietly. Very. She hesitated, then sat down across from me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air was thick with everything we weren't saying. Finally, she sighed. I didn't think you'd actually go through with it. Neither did I admitted, but here we are. She looked down at her hands. Do you hate me that much? I put my fork down. I don't hate you, Clara. I just got tired of feeling like an employee in my own marriage. Her eyes met mine, and for the first time in months, I saw a flicker of the woman I fell in love with. The one who used to laugh at bad jokes and eat pizza on the floor with Clara sat across from me like she was about to negotiate a merger with the devil. And for once, the devil had a beer and a steak. The silence between us wasn't ordinary silence. It was shareholder meeting silence, the kind that comes right before someone gets fired. Her voice was steady but low. I never meant for things to get this bad. Define bad, I said. Because from where I'm sitting, the food's great, the house is quiet, and nobody's yelling at me about the eye of toilet paper. Her nostrils flared. You humiliated me, Lucas. I nodded slowly. You made our marriage a financial experiment. I just provided data. She groaned, rubbing her temples. God, you sound like my CFO. Finally, I said. Some recognition for my unpaid role. She shot me a look that could strip paint. You think this is funny, don't you? Clara, it's the first funny thing that's happened in years. You've got to admit, your mother's scream had perfect acoustics. The neighbors thought we were filming a horror movie. She covered her face with her hands. They probably did. I cut another piece of steak and chewed slowly, giving her time to marinate in the absurdity. After a long pause, she said, You know my parents think you're insane. I prefer the term self-employed. Lucas, she started, but then she stopped, exhaled, and looked up. You really hurt them today. I leaned back in my chair. Good. Maybe next time they'll think twice before treating me like a house-trained intern. She folded her arms. They were just trying to help. Help? They called my roast pedestrian. That's not help. That's culinary manslaughter. Her lips twitched, and for half a second, I thought she might actually laugh. But she caught herself, straightened, and said, This isn't about them. It's about us. Finally, I said, raising my beer. The quarterly relationship review. Her eyes narrowed. Do you ever stop joking? Not when I'm right. The tension broke for just a moment when she rolled her eyes, The same role she used to give me when we were still in love, before everything became performance metrics. It was small, but it was there. A spark of the old Clara. You really think you've won something here, don't you? She asked. I shrugged. Not yet, but I'm leading in market sentiment. Unbelievable, she muttered. No, I said softly. What's unbelievable is how I let myself become invisible for so long. I spent years doing the emotional heavy lifting while you built your empire. And the first time I asked for acknowledgement, you treat me like a cost center. That hit her. I could see it in the way her shoulders slumped slightly, the armor cracking. I didn't mean to make you feel that way. Then what did you mean to do? I wanted us both to have independence. I thought separate budgets would make things fairer. I raised an eyebrow. Fairer? Clara, you make triple what I do. You were never at risk of not paying the Amex. You just wanted to control how we spent, not what we spent. She sighed. You make it sound so sinister. It's not sinister, I said. It's just classic corporate overreach. Her mouth twitched again, fighting back a smile. She hated that I could still make her laugh, even in ruins. She stood up, walked to the sink, and poured herself a glass of water. The clink of ice cubes was the only sound in the room. When she finally spoke again, her voice was quieter. You made your point, okay? You're angry, and I deserve some of that. But can we please stop turning our house into a reality show? Sure, I said, finishing my beer. Right after the season finale. She groaned, pinching the bridge of her nose. You're impossible, and yet irreplaceable, I said, standing to clear my plate. She watched me for a moment and, you really think you're the victim here? No, I said, rinsing the dish. I think I'm the guy who finally stopped volunteering for unpaid overtime. When I turned back around, she was leaning against the counter, arms folded, eyes softer than before. So what now? I shrugged. Now we see if the company can survive restructuring. She stared at me for a long time, then said, you know, if you weren't so damn infuriating, you might actually be inspiring. Add that to my resume, I said. She let out a long breath and walked past me toward the stairs. I'm going to bed. Need me to invoice you for emotional reconciliation? I called after her. The middle finger she flashed me was the most human gesture I'd seen from her all week. When she disappeared upstairs, I sat at the kitchen island and opened my laptop. Not the spreadsheet this time. Something different. A blank page titled Chaos Report. Phase 2. Because here's the thing. Once you start taking your life back, you realize how much of it was quietly stolen. I wasn't trying to destroy Clara. I was forcing her to see the imbalance she'd built around herself. Every label, every invoice, every sarcastic jab. It wasn't revenge. It was a mirror. I typed a few notes. Margaret Turner, Eastwood liability. Clara Reynolds, CEO on the verge of brand rehabilitation. Lucas Turner, Department of Freedom. Then I closed the laptop and actually laughed out loud. The next morning, chaos found new life. I woke up to the smell of burning toast, Claire's latest attempt at independence. She was at the counter, dressed in her usual pre-meeting perfection, but her hair was slightly frazzled. Progress. Morning, Shonan, I said. She gave a small nod without looking at me. Morning. Breakfast for one? She hesitated. I figured we'd keep the separate thing going. Of course, I said, pouring coffee. Wouldn't want to mess with the brand identity. She groaned softly. Can you not? Not what? Turn everything into a punchline. I'm sorry, I said, dead serious. You set the tone. I'm just following your leadership. She glared, then sighed. You're exhausting. You're welcome. When she left for work, the house felt like a strange mix of peace and aftershock. I wandered through it, noticing all the little signs of control I'd ignored for years. The perfectly curated shelf, the matching storage boxes labeled vision, focus, and wellness. She'd organized life into aesthetic categories, and I'd been filed somewhere under miscellaneous. Not anymore. By noon, Sam showed up. He didn't knock. He never does. Bro, he said the moment he walked in, your house is trending on the neighborhood app. I blinked. What? He handed me his phone. There it was, a post from Lang Judy 42. Did anyone else hear that terrible scream yesterday? Sounded like a crime scene at the Turner residence. Should we call someone? Below it, comments. Probably just a marital dispute. Again, those two are either divorcing or starring in a sitcom. Can confirm. I saw the husband holding a beer and smiling. Sam was laughing so hard he nearly dropped his phone. Dude, you're a legend. I grinned. Finally, some positive press. He looked around the kitchen and spotted the sticky notes still clinging to the fridge. You're keeping them up? Brand consistency, I said. He whistled. You really went nuclear. I said. I prefer to think of it as corporate transparency. We spent the afternoon joking about it, but underneath the laughter was something heavier. Sam finally said, You know she's probably not done, right? Claire's the type to rebrand after a PR disaster. I'm counting on it, I said. Maybe she'll learn to read the fine print this time. When he left, I sat on the couch and thought about everything that had happened. The scream, the chaos, the silence that followed. For the first time, I didn't feel like a failure or a villain. I felt balance. Later that evening, Clara came home early, unusual for her. She stood at the doorway for a second before speaking. We need to talk. About the hostile takeover, I asked. She ignored the joke. About us. I gestured toward the couch. Have a seat, Ms. Reynolds. She sat, took a deep breath, and said, You made me look at myself today, and I didn't like what I saw. That caught me off guard. She continued, voice trembling slightly. I've been treating everything, including you, like a business problem. It's what I'm good at. Control makes me feel safe. Yeah, I said softly. And being controlled makes me feel disposable, she nodded. I know, and I'm sorry. The room went quiet. For a second I thought maybe, just maybe, we were crossing back into something real. But then she added, However, you can't keep mocking me publicly. My reputation... I held up a hand. And there it is, the sequel. Lucas, I'm serious. So am I. You care more about your reputation than your relationship. That's the problem, Clara. Not the fridge, not the labels, not even your parents. It's that you treat your marriage like a brand partnership. She looked down at her hands. Maybe I don't know how to stop. Then start small, I said. Try saying sorry without a press release attached. She actually laughed, softly but real. You're infuriating. I know, and I said, but I'm also right. She shook her head. You really think you've changed things? Oh, I know I have, I said, standing. You can't unhear your mother's scream. That made her laugh harder despite herself, and for the first time in months, the laughter wasn't sarcastic. It was human, messy, alive. I didn't know if this was reconciliation or just the eye of the storm, but one thing was clear. The illusion of her perfect control was gone. The Turner dynasty had cracked, and inside the wreckage, something resembling honesty was starting to grow. And as she sat there, still chuckling, shaking her head at the absurdity of it all, I realized the chaos hadn't destroyed us. It had finally made us real. Monday morning arrived, pretending to be ordinary, but even the sunlight felt like it was tiptoeing around our house. The Turner household was now an active war zone under a temporary ceasefire. Clara made coffee without speaking. I buttered toast like I was diffusing explosives. Every clink of a spoon sounded like a threat. She was dressed for power. Navy suit, white blouse, hair in that ruthless bun that made interns cry. I was in sweats and a t-shirt that said, World's okayest husband. Irony was my armor. We moved around each other silently, the way ex-co-workers do after someone gets demoted. I thought maybe, just maybe, we'd survive the morning without another battle. Then she opened her mouth. So, she said, pouring her green smoothie into a mason jar, I got 3 texts from my mother last night. Only 3? She must be medicated. Lucas! Her tone was a warning shot. She's worried about you. That's sweet, I said. I'm worried about the stock market. We all have crosses to bear. She set her jar down hard enough to make it slosh. I told her we'd moved past the fridge incident. Fridge incident makes it sound like it was an accident, I said. It was an event. Historical, even. She glared. Can you take anything seriously? Sure, I said. Taxes, parking tickets, climate change. But your parents' emotional weather? Not my jurisdiction. She inhaled sharply through her nose, the sound of a woman calculating homicide sentencing. Anyway, she said, Mom and Dad think we should consider counseling. I almost choked on my toast. Counseling? From who, Margaret? She just invoiced me for emotional disruption services. Her eyes narrowed. No, professional counseling. I leaned against the counter. Clara, our entire marriage was a management seminar. I think we've had enough professional guidance. She picked up her purse, clipped, efficient. I'm serious, Lucas. So am I said. I already have a counselor. His name's Sam. He comes with beer and sarcasm. Her lips pressed together so tight they could have cut diamonds. You're impossible. Still cheaper than therapy, I said. She grabbed her keys. I have a meeting. Don't burn the house down. No promises, I called as she left. When the door slammed, the silence was so thick it practically echoed. I stared at the spot where she'd stood and thought, she really doesn't get it. She was still treating the problem like a PR crisis. Contain it, spin it, move on. But the issue wasn't optics. It was substance. And the substance was rotting. I sat down at my desk and opened the old folder that held every document tied to the house. Purchase agreement, mortgage breakdown, trust paperwork. I hadn't looked at it since we moved in. But after her separate budget stunt, something about those numbers started itching in the back of my mind. Half an hour later, the itch turned into a grin. 'Cause buried in the fine print, beneath her signature and mine, was the line item I'd nearly forgotten. Down payment covered in full by the Turner Family Trust, Lucas Turner beneficiary. Ownership share, 70%. 70%. I leaned back in my chair and let out a laugh so loud the dog barked. Well, well, well. Clara had spent the past week acting like the queen of this castle, and here I was discovering she'd been living in my castle. It wasn't about revenge. It was about leverage. For the first time in years, I had something she couldn't spin into a TED Talk. I printed the page, highlighted the clause, and pinned it to the fridge, right below the leftover sticky notes from my private property era. Artistic symmetry. When she came home that evening, the sun was setting, the house spotless, dinner for one already eaten. She walked in, dropped her bag, and froze the moment she saw the highlighted document. What is that? I wiped my hands on a towel, feigning innocence. Oh, just a little light reading. Thought you might enjoy the fine print of our domestic arrangement. She stepped closer, eyes scanning the paper. I could see the exact second the numbers hit her. Her pupils dilated. 70%? She whispered. Yep, I said, popping the P. Congratulations, you've been living in a subsidized reality. That can't be right. Oh, it's right, I said. My grandfather's trust covered the down payment, remember? You just decorated the place. She looked up sharply. You're exaggerating. Nope, check the deed. It's public record. You're technically living in my asset. She blinked, stunned. You're joking. I never joke about property law, I said. For a moment, she just stood there, silent, staring at me like her software crashed. Then she laughed, but it was the brittle laugh of someone trying to convince herself she still had control. You think this changes anything? She said. I shrugged. Depends. Do you still want to split budgets? Because technically, rent's due. Lucas! What? You started this independence thing. I'm just managing my assets responsibly. Her voice rose. You're weaponizing finances. Correction. I'm monetizing injustice. She threw her purse onto the counter. You're being petty. Thank you, I said. I prefer strategically vindictive, but petty works too. She pointed at the paper. This is cruel. No, I said evenly. This is truth. You've been acting like I'm freeloading off your empire, Clara. Turns out, you've been living in mine. That landed like a grenade. For a few seconds, the only sound was the hum of the refrigerator, a loyal witness to our downfall. Finally, she said quietly, You enjoy hurting me. I shook my head. No, Clara. I enjoy watching reality do its job. She grabbed the paper off the fridge and ripped it in half. There, happy? Depends, I said. Did tearing up evidence change legal ownership? Her mouth fell open. You're insufferable, and yet you married me. She spun away, pacing the kitchen like she was calculating a counteroffer. You think this makes you the hero? Hero? No, just a man who finally read the contract he signed. She slammed her hand on the counter. You're impossible, and you're predictable, I said. You hate losing control more than you love being right. That one hit home. I could see it in her eyes, the flicker of truth she didn't want to admit. She turned, stormed out of the kitchen, and I heard the office door slam upstairs. I exhaled, feeling the adrenaline crash. My hands were shaking, not from anger, but from the surreal realization that I'd finally drawn a boundary and stuck to it. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed. Sam, of course. Sam. Dude, what did you do now? Me. Dropped a truth bomb. Sam. How big? Me. 70%. Sam. Bro, I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my beer. For the next hour, I sat in the quiet, replaying the scene in my head. Claire's face when she saw the claws. Her voice cracking when she realized she'd built her throne on borrowed ground. It was poetic. But somewhere under the satisfaction, something else stirred. Guilt, maybe, or nostalgia for the version of us that existed before all this nonsense. Back then, she used to joke that we were a team, that we'd build together. I just hadn't realized she meant I'd lay the foundation while she built the pedestal. At around 9, she came downstairs. No makeup now, no armor, just Clara in sweatpants, holding a glass of wine like it was a peace flag. Can we talk? She asked. I nodded, cautious. Sure. She sat across from me at the table. I didn't know about the trust percentage. I really didn't. I believe you, I said. But you used it to humiliate me. No, I said quietly. I used it to remind you. She looked down at her wine. Of what? That this whole empire of yours? It's not built alone. You had help. You had me. Her eyes lifted to mine, softer now. You really hate me, don't you? Not even close, I said. If I hated you, I'd stop caring. I'm just tired of being erased. She exhaled shakily. I don't know how to fix this. Start by admitting you broke it, I said. She nodded slowly. You're right. I blinked. Say that again? You're right, she repeated, louder this time. There, I said it, don't gloat. Too late, I said, smiling despite myself. She rolled her eyes but smiled too, faintly. You're impossible. And yet oddly lovable, I said. The corner of her mouth lifted. For a split second, we weren't CEO and sarcastic husband. We were just two people trying not to laugh at the mess we'd made. Then, as always, the corporate Clara rebooted. But seriously, she said, what happens next? You've made your point. Next, I leaned back. Next, we figure out if we're partners or competitors. She stared at me, then whispered, what if I don't know the difference anymore? Then it's time you learn, I said. She nodded slowly, stood and started upstairs. At the bottom of the steps, she paused. For what it's worth, she said without turning around. Thank you for reminding me what humility feels like. Any time, I said. I bill hourly. She groaned but didn't argue. When she disappeared into the bedroom, I sat there alone, staring at the torn document on the counter. I should have felt triumphant, but I didn't, because beneath all the sarcasm, there was this quiet truth humming inside me. I didn't want her destroyed. I just wanted her present. I poured myself another drink and whispered, 70% ownership, 0% peace. Some victory. But even as the guilt settled in, I knew one thing for sure. No matter how this story ended, the Turner brand of perfection had finally cracked wide open, and the truth was spilling out for everyone to see. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. I felt seen. The house was quiet the next morning, but not the peaceful kind. More like that eerie calm after an earthquake when you're still waiting to see what's broken. Clara had already left for work. Her half of the coffee pot was untouched. That was new. She always drank hers first. I wandered through the kitchen, eyes landing on the torn contract still sitting on the counter. Half of my truth bomb, half of hers. Even ripped in two, the paper looked smug. It had done its job. Around noon, my phone buzzed. A text from Henry Turner, of all people. Regarding recent domestic events, discretion is advised. Translation? Stop making our family the neighborhood entertainment. I laughed, deleted the message, and went back to my laptop. If only they knew how freeing it felt to finally stop performing for their approval. That evening, Clara came home late. No dramatic entrances, no speeches. Just exhaustion. She dropped her bag, looked at me, and said, everyone at work's been whispering. My mother apparently called the board to check in on my stability. Oof, I said. That's rough. Did you tell them the fridge is fine? Her glare could have melted steel, but then she sighed. You really don't care what they think anymore, do you? Nope, I said. Caring was part of the old budget. For the first time in a long while, she didn't fight back. She just sat beside me on the couch, quiet. The weight of the week sat between us. Unpaid invoices, shredded pride, and the lingering smell of burnt casserole. Finally, she said, I don't know if we can fix us, Lucas. Maybe not, I said, but at least we're finally being honest about what broke. She nodded slowly, eyes tired but sincere. You know, she murmured. For a guy who labels his groceries, you're surprisingly insightful. I smiled. Occupational hazard of surviving a corporate marriage. We sat there in silence. Awkward, fragile, human. No spreadsheets, no PR spin. Just two people trying to remember what love looked like before it came with performance metrics. And for the first time in weeks, the quiet didn't feel hostile. It felt like the start of something real. It's funny how peace doesn't make a sound. After all the yelling, spreadsheets, and fridge warfare, silence felt like a luxury item. A month later, the house was sold. Clara handled the realtors with her usual precision. I just signed where needed and let her take the furniture she'd curated. I kept the coffee maker and the dog. Fair trade. She moved into a sleek downtown apartment. Minimalist, expensive, lonely. I heard she started going to therapy, which, honestly, was the best investment she'd ever made. As for me, I found a small place in Brooklyn, a studio with sunlight and character. Two things our marriage had been missing. I turned my freelance design gig into a real business. Turner Creative Studio. My first client, ironically, one of Clara's competitors. The universe really does have a sense of humor. Every Friday, I pour a glass of whiskey, sit by the window, and watch the city lights blink like Morse code messages from freedom itself. People ask if I miss her. Sometimes, yeah. Not the CEO version, the real Clara. The one who laughed in diners and made me promise we'd never become one of those couples. We did, though. But the thing about endings, they teach you beginnings. So I toast to that Friday night when she said, the privilege is over. She thought she was cutting me off. Turns out she freed me. Now the fridge is mine alone. No sticky notes, no labels, just space. And every time I open it, I smile. 'Cause that scream everyone still talks about, that wasn't chaos. That was freedom ringing.